Welcome back, guys. Today is going to be the review on the Emotiva BasX A-150 stereo power amplifier. Before we get into things, make sure to check out my unboxing video I've done of this amplifier. I ordered it from Amazon and went ahead and performed an unboxing video. So let's get started and talk about this power amp quickly. So for those that aren't aware, Emotiva recently, about 2 years ago, came up with the BasX line of equipment or products that they carry. It is an affordable product line from Emotiva: power amplifiers, processors, speakers, and so on and so forth. However, in the power amplifiers range, we begin with the A-150. That is their entry-level, most affordable power amplifier meant for two-channel and home theater. There is a 100, I believe, that is a headphone amplifier and whatnot, but we're going to begin with the A-150. Moving up from there, right here, you can see the A-300. That is essentially this guy's big brother. He's double the wattage, but only $100 more. So in terms of value, that's probably winning or topping the cake, so to speak, in terms of what people are buying nowadays. From the A300, we move up to the A500, a 5-channel power amp. The A150 and 300 are both 2 channels. We've got 75 watts RMS at 8 ohms, 2 channels driven on the A150, and on the A300 we've got 150 watts at 8 ohms with 2 channels driven, rated 20 to 20 as well. But moving up from the A300, there's the A500, A700, A800, and in between there we have another 5-channel, that's the A5175. But over the last few weeks, I have really put this power amplifier to the test. I'm going to say that I've tried it and used it in a few different setups, different rooms, different speakers, different wires, different setups. But let's talk about the 2 main configurations I've tested it in. First one, of course, is home theater. That's why it's sitting in this living room here. It was connected to my Marantz receiver from the pre-out section. Now first, I connected it a few different ways, so I'm going to talk about that quickly and then we'll move on. I actually initially had it connected to my front, left, and right pre-outs, so it was actually driving my front, left, and right main speakers to begin with. I wanted to get an overall idea or feeling of how powerful this amp can be and is it capable of driving your main speakers. So after I'd performed that, I tried a few different speakers in its place, a few of the different SVS Prime series, as well as a pair of KEF speakers, ultimately ending up with my Klipsch towers being a very, very great fit for this. In fact, it actually worked best, though, as a height channel power amplifier. So for driving a set of Dolby Atmos or DTS X height speakers, I ultimately liked it best paired up with my SVS Prime elevation speakers. You can see hanging up on the wall over there. Now, considering that it's got only 75 watts, let's talk about the amplifier itself for a second. Now, all of these amplifiers use a heavy-duty linear power supply, carefully designed high-current short signal path Class AB output stage with advanced microprocessor-controlled monitoring protection circuitry to deliver the sound quality and responsive audio that it does. Now, talking particularly about this guy, it doesn't have the exact same capacitors that I've come to love that are in the A300 and so on and so forth off the BasX line, considering those are 10,000 microfarads per channel, 105 degrees Celsius rated capacitors. Also, they are commercial grade as opposed to a consumer grade. So they are really, really insanely good capacitors built into these amplifiers as opposed to power amps from other brands. But surprisingly, this A150 really held up in my configuration. So I talked about how I'd used it in a home theater setup. I drove my front height speakers, drove my rear height speakers. It really worked out well as a home theater power amp, and I think that's its main function in terms of a design factor or why they made this power amp. I don't think it was necessarily in mind to drive a front pair of stereo speakers and a high-end 2-channel setup, but ultimately it ended up being wonderfully pairing with a set of height speakers, because let's talk about the 75 watts for a minute. So with both channels driven, it does rate at 75 watts RMS, 20 to 20, with a total harmonic distortion value of less than 0.1% into 8 ohms, guys. It is 150 watts RMS per channel at 1 kilohertz with a total harmonic distortion of less than 1% into 4 ohms with a power bandwidth of, at rated power, in 8 ohm load, 20 to 20, plus or minus 0.07 decibels, guys. But ultimately, my favorite thing about these Emotiva BasX power amps really comes down to the total harmonic distortion plus noise. And that's what factors into what makes an amplifier sound really as good as it can. Now, this has less than 0.02% of THD plus noise at A-weighted reference rated power, guys, with a signal to noise ratio at an 8 ohm load, mind you, of 120 decibels at reference rated power A-weighted, and less than 100 dB at referenced 1 watt A-weighted. So these guys are really crisp, clean, clear power amplifiers that provide a lot of current and power, to be honest with you. A very average 29 dB a gain, right, and an input sensitivity of 27 kiloohms. These power amps are pretty much designed to run with any kind of speaker out there from 4 to 8 ohms. And I think the A150 can generally drive them effortlessly depending on the room size. So I'm going to kind of put this disclaimer out there and tell you what I thought about the 150 in general over a more powerful or expensive power amp. So if you've got a smaller room, say, pretty much the size of this living room, if it's any bigger than that, you might want to go with a little bit extra, power or current, but generally in this living room, this amp worked out great. As I said before, I really tried it and put it to the test in the home theater configuration and set up driving the height speakers, but even driving the front, left, and right speakers and also a set of wides, it adequately drove towers as well as bookshelves to their, I wouldn't say fullest potential, but to a general amount of referenced power. It doesn't compare with the A150, but let's talk about this. Two separate power amps being different power. So let's say we've got a 75 watt power amp that you see in front of you right there, and then the 150 watt power amp that you see to the right. So the A300 is its big brother, correct? And the A300 sounds absolutely 100% the same at the same volume. When you take two different power amps and one of them has more power, as long as they have the same gain, the same input sensitivity, and you're providing the exact same amount of voltage, considering that it's RMS voltage from the preamp or processor, you're going to get the exact same amount of volume and a very, very similar sound, considering all of the total harmonic distortion values, noise floor, and whatnot are similar in those power amps. So comparing the A150 to the A300, which I adequately performed over the last couple days here, really you cannot tell a difference. It isn't until you start to turn the volume up past really the level that you would adequately be able to live with, I say. And I say that because this is a smaller room. It's not going to take a very powerful amp to drive this setup to a reference volume, in my opinion, guys. Now, if we were to move down into the basement and we've got a much larger room, harder walls, bigger tower speakers, then you might want to go with something like the A300. But to be honest with you, this 150 really, really surprised me in its amount of power before we started clipping or getting any distortion out of it. So I'm going to move on and talk about the second ultimate configuration that I had set up and hooked up to this power amp. So after using it with my surround sound receivers, different Marantz, and even a Pioneer, to be honest with you, I ultimately loved the way that it sounds with a 2-channel analog setup. That's why we've got the Parasound preamplifier sitting right there, because I really put this guy to the test with that Parasound preamp as well as the Marantz receiver, but ultimately figuring out that this amp is perfectly adequate in a higher-end 2-channel setup. It's definitely not the most high-end amp out there, but to be honest with you, if you were to put people in a room and blindfold them and have this A150, say, next to a Mark Levinson amp, with a general, affordable set of speakers, I really don't think people would be able to tell the difference. That isn't to say that this, compares to some of the higher-end Dan D'Agostino, the Krell, or the, like a Moon 888 amp, but I'm just saying that this really, really did surprise me in the amount of power and current it was able to put out in a two-channel setup. Ultimately, that's why I guess I chose the Parasound preamp, because it does send out a ton of voltage. Actually, if I'm not mistaken, I believe it's around a maximum of 7 to 8 volts that this guy puts out. So putting a ton of current into this power amp really did not stress it. I want to talk about, though, when the 75 watts becomes not enough or insufficient. So if we take this Parasound preamp, for example, and we look at the volume knob, when we got about halfway up there, so if we were to turn this guy halfway up, that is kind of when it started to distort. Now, if I had it hooked up to the A300, which I love that configuration, mind you, you actually can get up halfway. Now, in this room, it's believably too loud to stand with it halfway turned up like that. You, at that point, are reaching hearing damage levels. But to be honest with you guys, in a size of room this big, this amp was sufficient. There was no difference, no bit of difference between the A300 and the A150 here. Let me talk about quickly, though, the reason you would want this power amp over something else. So there are several power amps on the market, but it's really truly difficult to find a higher-end power amplifier with this good of sound quality for under $500, and to be honest with you, the A300 has really taken the cake in that sense of people choosing a stereo power amp. But this A150, beyond surprising me, it really set the standard, so to speak, of how much power is required. And I think that's why I had mentioned before, guys, how for a set of Dolby Atmos or DTS X height speakers, this guy is fully adequate, because there are definitely other power amps on the market that are $500 and above that still only have 75 watts RMS with both channels driven. There's an Onkyo out on the market that's about $250, I believe. That's the same amount of wattage. To be honest with you, I'd much rather have this A150 over any other two-channel 75-watt power amp. Now, if you're in a room that's, say, size of a basement or a dedicated theater, this probably isn't going to do it for you. But even in that situation, I would still say that dedicated to a set of height channels, height speakers, or in-ceiling speakers, this guy would be perfectly adequate. I do not think that you could drive him with a set of height speakers to its fullest potential where it would start entering into soft clipping or distortion at all. But for some, the 75 watts is definitely a deal breaker. A lot of people are looking for more power than that. Let's just talk about its connectivity. Both amps are exactly the same. All of the BasX series amps offer the same things. No buttons or controls other than 5-way binding posts on the rear. But with its ruggish build quality and amazing good looks of that 2RU milled aluminum front faceplate, this guy is just an amazing product. And like I said, guys, I could not get it to start distorting, at least in this room with the equipment I have. It wasn't until I started moving it into the other room with a large pair of tower speakers that I actually got it to start distorting. And like I said before, if you were to turn this power, this preamplifier up to about halfway volume with just about any pair of 8-ohm speakers, you're going to start reaching the point of where this guy can't handle it or starts to run out of steam, so to speak. But beyond the on and off switch on the back, the front on and off switch you see here that illuminates orange when it's turned off, you've got two status LED lights that can be actually turned off on the rear. So if you turn those off, all you'll see is that blue or orange power indicator. You've got a 12-volt trigger in, as well as a 12-volt trigger out, so you can daisy chain power amps or control the power of this guy to another guy, or say when I turn my preamplifier on, I could send a control cable out of him into him and power that guy on. Since the power amps don't come with any remotes, the 12-volt triggers really do offer a lot of conveniency in the sense of turning them on and off and powering or controlling other equipment. Alright, so what's most important of a power amp, guys? It's ultimately the sound, the sonic characteristics of which it offers, and how it's able to produce that audio. This was amazing, let me tell you. There was nothing I could throw at this power amp that would sound bad, whether it be movies, music, digital audio, analog. I ran vinyl records off of it. I ran things from an AudioQuest DAC. I did so much different source material played through this power amp. There was nothing I could find that sounded bad. In fact, I believe if you were to take most surround sound receivers, at least at the under $1,000 cost, and play them in a stereo setup, this power amp right here would sound better, hands down, over most of the AV receivers in a stereo configuration. And I think that's partly why the power amps have become so popular lately, is a bunch of people, I think, have realized that their, surround sound receivers aren't the best sounding units or devices in a stereo or two-channel configuration. That really, the current on demand is what you're needing or utilizing in a sense of with stereo playback, guys. And this amp delivers that. It really did things adequately. It drove all my speakers effortlessly. And there wasn't a situation I could find that really made it sound garbled or distorted in any way. So let's talk about a rating system. How would I rate this guy or compare him to other power amps or products on the market, at least cost considering and function as well as performance? So in terms of cost, the A150 I would give a 3 out of 5 stars. It's definitely not the cheapest, most affordable power amp out there, but it is one of the better sounding amps, at least at this price point. For value, I'd have to give a 4.5 out of 5 stars. With this power amplifier, you do get chassis mounted connectors as opposed to PCB. You do get extruded aluminum heat sinks, as well as the commercial grade capacitors I've come to love that are in the A300 as well. In terms of an overall ergonomics and features, I'd say it doesn't have all of the features that most power amps, at least at $500 and up, have in terms of a gain selection or other home theater bypass features or so on and so forth, but it does have the necessary triggers, the LED status lights, on and off switches, and power buttons. So I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5 stars ultimately in the end. In terms of performance, though, this amp performed. It was nothing shy of what I expected, at least from knowing the A300 so far. That's going to wrap this video up today, guys. I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. I've come to love this Emotiva A150 BasX power amp. Don't forget to subscribe, guys. Take care.